Welcome everybody. I'm delighted to have you join us today for this session on managing harvesting contractors. My name's Sharon Smith and I'm CWA's Member Support Officer. Today we are discussing and learning about how to best manage harvesting contractors, which is no mean feat, to be honest, and doing it well requires knowledge, confidence, and a true understanding of what you want and need for your forest and your land beyond the financial constraints. So to share their knowledge and expertise, we've invited along today John Ireland from Scottish Forestry, whose role as Health and Safety Advisor is to provide training and increased knowledge and understanding so that you'll all follow the health and safety requirements to keep yourselves and the general public and any contractors safe whilst undertaking the harvesting work. John is a well-known face to CWA, recently having presented on tree risk at our conference in October, and he's a very dedicated professional mentor for us as well. We're also joined by Alisdair Martin. Ali's the forest manager at Aegis Community Forest, as well as having his own forestry work business. Ali has a wealth of experience in felling trees and managing forests, and today we'll share, amongst other things, the importance of timing and preparation and the potential consequences of not doing either, and the importance of managing the contractors well. And finally, we'll be joined by Ross Johnston and Tim Elliott, both from Campus Barron Development Trust. I recently visited their community woodland on a site visit at our Stirling conference, and it is indeed a beautiful place. However, it has had its challenges over the years, with a significant one being the challenge of managing the short noticed felling obligations that followed the receipt of a statutory plant health notice, with large felling required on a third of the community woodland area. There's certainly going to be plenty to learn from today's session. Each speaker will speak for 20 minutes and then we'll finish with a Q&A at the end. However, John is currently sitting in a lay-by somewhere en route to Aberdeen, so rather than have him sit through all of today's webinar, we'll ask if you have any specific questions for John, then he can answer them either straight after his 20-minute talk to you and or by email if you've got questions thereafter that you want to put in the chat. Before we begin, please indulge me a couple of minutes just to tell you about the work of CWA and how you can join us if you're not already a member. Community Woodlands Association helps communities connect to their woodlands. We currently have 177 members, most of whom are community groups owning or managing woodland in Scotland. There are many benefits of being a member of Community Woodlands Association. And they are that we advocate, first of all, in the political arena on behalf of our members, responding to consultations when they are required. We provide support and advice to communities who are looking to start up a community woodland group or who already have a woodland and are looking for onward support. We connect and join the dots. It's a huge part of our role, which we achieve through listening to our members' needs and then supporting with training sessions such as this, exchange visits to other woodlands and mentoring programmes, and we also have our annual conference. We provide professional support through our team members. We have Pierce Voicey and Alice Brawley, who are our woodland officers, and they are able to provide paid advice and consultancy to any member groups. And finally, we work in partnership with strategic partners across Scotland to make it easier for our communities to be actively involved in woodland management. And if you're not a member already of Community Woodlands Association and you'd like to be a member of Community Woodlands Association, you might quickly want to take a screenshot of this QR code or I will put the link into the chat before the end of the session for you to explore your options. So before we go any further, I'd like to welcome John Ireland to today's session. And I look forward to hearing, John, what you've got to say. I'll move the slides on for you as discussed since you are stuck in a wee lay-by. Nice to have you, John, and you come.
Excellent, thanks very much. Yeah, okay, so you heard my introduction. So a lot of experience in forest industry, been working in forest industry since the early 80s. Work that you do when you're managing contractors or you've got contractors in working for you and stuff all comes under the Health and Safety at Work Act for your kind of criminal law side and comes under your kind of Occupiers Liability Act for your civil law side. Now, the stuff that we're going to talk about, the kind of managing health and safety and forestry guidance, if you follow that guidance, you're basically complying with what you have to do according to the Health and Safety at Work Act, what you would be held to account for, sort of thing. So if we could move on to the next slide. Okay, so today, providing an overview of the guidance and an introduction to the 5 roles. You'll often hear the guidance referred to as the 5 roles because basically the guidance splits up what people need to do into the sort of 5 roles of people that are working on the site. So if we move on. Okay, so there's a kind of screenshot of the kind of cover. You can pick up the guidance from the FISA site, so the Forest Industry Safety Accord. You can download the guidance from there, and you can either download it as one big book, or you can download the kind of the individual 5 roles, which gives wee kind of explanations about what you need to do, what your duties under that role are. Next slide. Okay, so this is the way I kind of explain it to our staff about what the 5 roles is, and I like to use the jigsaw because it's all about being kind of integrated in your thinking and putting the stuff together. It's like you're building a jigsaw of what the work is, and the jigsaw forms that whole picture of what you need to do. So you can see the 5 roles there. You've got landowner, you've got forest works manager, you've got contractor, subcontractor, and worker. So the guidance basically splits up into these 5 roles. So generally, as a sort of like a community woodland, you would be the landowner, so you own the land that's the work's happening on. You might be the forest works manager, or you might be employing somebody to be the forest works manager, or you might be the contractor as well. So the same people can actually do multiple roles within the sort of the way that the guidance works. Sometimes it's individual, so it's like an individual landowner, it's an individual that's the forest works manager, and it's an individual that's the contractor, subcontractor, and the worker sort of thing. Or it might be the same person doing 3 out of the 5 roles, or you know, doing all the stuff that's kind of associated with these 5 roles. So each role has kind of like a specific kind of responsibility. So if we move on to the next slide. So here's the kind of definitions. So the landowner, so that's the person or organisation in control of the land on which the forestry work's taking place. The forest works manager, or the FWM, is the person or organisation who commissions the work on the forestry site. The contractor is the person doing the work, so the provider of the forestry service. And the subcontractor is anyone engaged by the contractor other than by direct employment. And then you've got your worker, so anyone within the forest industry undertaking the kind of the related tasks on this site. So that's your kind of like your definitions, and then each of the roles has stuff that they should do. So if we move on to the next slide. Okay, so here's the landowner. So the landowner is the person in control of the land on which the work takes place. And it's your job as the landowner and in control of that land to kind of gather the information about the site where the forestry work's going to be working. So you're looking for stuff like environmental surveys, archaeology surveys. It can be kind of like your hazards and constraints. So you might have, you know, particularly steep bit of ground. There's like a cliff face in this bit here. There's a boggy bit over in this bit here on the site, or there's somebody's public water supply might be on the site. So that's all the sort of information that as a landowner, you need to gather and pass on to the forest works manager. So it's the landowner's role to ensure that the work on a particular work site does not affect the health and safety of other people as well. So they need to think about how the work that's going to happen on that work site, how does that affect people not on the work site? That's quite a key role for the landowner one. So they need to do kind of like a serious think when they have a look and see what the contractors come up with and how they're going to do the work between the forest works manager and the contractor, the landowner needs to think about how that work's going to affect the people not at work, who that kind of work, members of public, their staff, their other volunteers, or other kind of visitors to the site and things. So that's quite a key role in it. So as you see about the kind of coordination as well, the landowner needs to think about how to coordinate between different people affected by the work, sort of thing. Okay, now we've moved on to the next one. So forest works manager. So that is the person who commissions the work. So that, they use the information given by the landowner to prepare the outline risk assessment. So they basically kind of set the standards of how they want the work to happen. And they select the competent contractor to do that work. And they must have kind of like adequate kind of supervision provisions, and that kind of, adequate resources to sort of, carry out the health and safety that's required. So they specify the measures for those on site for the people that may be affected by the work activity as well. So that's where Forest Works Manager is thinking about how we're going to control this site so it doesn't affect people that aren't at work on this site. So you can see this kind of strong theme about they control the work, but they're also controlling how do we keep people that aren't supposed to be on that work site off that work site. So they have to liaise with the landowner. As I say, it might be the same person, so they're kind of liaising with themselves, but they need to kind of wear different hats. So as the landowner, you do all your stuff that you're supposed to do, and then as the Forest Works Manager, you do all your stuff that you're supposed to do, as a kind of like thinking about yourself as in that role. Or it might be a completely different person. So it might be the landowner's the community group, and the Forest Works Manager could be, say, like a forester working for Till Hill or whatever, that's kind of organising the work for you type thing. So they kind of liaise with the landowner, think about, making sure that they've got all the stuff that they need to get. So if we move on to the next role, the contractor role. So the contractor is the provider of the forest service. So they work with the Forest Works Manager to ensure health and safety standards are met. So the Forest Works Manager says to the contractor, I need you to have like a safe working system for doing this site. We've got steep ground over here, we've got boggy ground here, we've got a public water supply here. And the contractor will tell them how they will kind of undertake the work without, affecting like the water supply and things like that. So the contractor and the Forest Works Manager basically have a discussion about how are we going to do the work, who's in charge of what, and what's the sort of systems, machines that we're going to use, how many people are we going to have on the site, all that sort of stuff. So again, they have to like select competent subcontractors if they're going to use other people. So they might have a subcontractor coming in to build them a track or something like that. So the contractor needs to make sure that that person's competent to do the work. Competency is one of the key themes that runs through this thing, the 5 roles. And the definition of competency is made up of several different things. It's not just like training. Competency is skills, knowledge, aptitude, so they want to do the work safely. Training's part of it, and experience is a huge part of it. So that skills and experience is a big part of evidencing that people are competent to do the work. So for example, they might be like a trained chainsaw operator, but they've never worked on a steep ground working site. So you would need to try and pick chainsaw operators that were used to working on steep ground working sites if your site's like a steep ground working site. And that's the sort of, the devil of the detail of like looking at the kind of competency. So Forest Works Manager and contractor kind of make sure that people doing the work have actually got the skills and experience to do that work. And the landowner needs to kind of check that they're doing that. So the landowner has this kind of like overarching role to ensure that they're checking the checker sort of thing. So have you checked that your chainsaw operator is used to working on steep ground working sites. Yes, we have. Here's our kind of evidence that we've checked that sort of thing. Now we move on to the subcontractor. So subcontractor, anyone engaged by the contractor other than by direct employment. So they have to cooperate with the arrangements for health and safety, and they have to manage their own health and safety on it as well there. So the subcontractors basically working to the contractor. So contractors in charge of the subcontractors. And then if we move on to the worker. So the worker, anyone working within the forest industry or undertaking related tasks, cooperates with the arrangements for health and safety and manages your own health and safety as well. So under the Health and Safety Work Act, people have a responsibility for you actually doing the work, but the people doing the work also have a responsibility to kind of do the work safely. It's kind of like a two-way street in the Health and Safety at Work Act. So they have to kind of cooperate and coordinate. If they are asked to do stuff, like this is how we want you to do the work over here, they need to kind of do it like that. They can't sort of go off on a frolic of their own, sort of, do it in a vastly different way. It all has to be kind of agreed and discussed. So that's the kind of the basic 5 roles. So landowner, forest works manager, contractor, subcontractor, and worker. And as I say, the FISA guidance, the Forest Industry Safety Accord guidance, splits that up nicely for you, gives you kind of chapters on each person's role and what they should be doing and how they should be kind of doing that. So if we move on to the next slide.
Just so you know, John, I've put the link to the FISA guidance in the chat for everyone.
Brilliant. That's excellent. So you can see why I've kind of used the jigsaw, because it's all about this exchange of flow of information. So the landowner tells the forest works manager all about their site. Forest works manager transfers that knowledge across to the contractor. Contractor discusses that with the forest works manager. Here's how we're going to do the work in a safe way. Comes up with their RAMs, so that kind of risk assessment and method statement of how we're going to do the work. And then if the subcontractors, or if you've got subcontractors coming in as well, you need to inform them of all that stuff as well. And the workers need to be informed of all that stuff as well. So it's like an exchange and flow of information kind of moving up and down across the 5 roles. It's not like a kind of hierarchy. It's like a flat way that it works. Landowner chatting to the forest works manager back to the landowner. Here's what we're thinking about doing. I've discussed this with the contractor, who's discussed that with the subcontractor, who's discussed this with their workers and all this sort of stuff. So they've come up with this RAMs, so the risk assessment and method statement. This is how we're going to do the work. And the landowner's getting an overview of how they're going to do that work. And what the landowner needs to do is the landowner needs to think, have they come up with a safe system that keeps people that aren't doing the work, that aren't on the work site, that aren't workers, like members of public, their other staff, their other volunteers, things like that, does it keep them safe? Does it keep them out of the site? How are they doing that? So there's this whole sort of like, everybody's got roles and responsibilities, and the guidance is really good at setting out these roles and responsibilities in a clear way, sort of thing. Okay, if we move on to the next slide. So if we need further information or chat through areas of concern, like the mentor scheme's a good way of doing that. If you've got harvesting sites and things coming up, or you're planning doing harvesting and stuff like that, get yourself on the mentor scheme and get some of the suitable mentors along or whatever, and they can kind of look at the sites with you and kind of chat you through sort of like options of how you would do sites like that. So you don't necessarily need to do them where you're the forest works manager. You might do them where you actually sell the timber standing to people and they organise all the work. They're the forest works manager. They basically become the landowner for the site that you've given them to harvest. You've given them the right to harvest that site, and they're in charge of all the kind of health and safety on that site and doing the harvesting and stuff. It's kind of like there's different ways of sort of organising the work. Yeah. Or peer-to-peer discussions, talking to other community groups that have organised harvesting work and how they've got on with it. the kind of pitfalls, the pros and cons, what worked well, what didn't work well. Harvesting sites and managing contractors takes a lot of time and effort. There's quite a bit kind of involved with it. And to be competent at doing that, have the kind of skills, knowledge, aptitude, training, experience, takes a wee bit to kind of build up that competency. Okay, if we move on to the next slide, we should be coming to the end. Here we go. So very kind of quick run through. I always work better kind of like discussing stuff with people. So over to kind of questions.
So folks, just come in if you've got any questions. I've got two for you, John, but if anybody else, just unmute please, and just in you come. Andy, you've unmuted. Is that a question you have?
Yes, Andy Ingles here. I actually used to work in a squad with John Ireland way back in the day.
Yeah,
I missed the beginning. My team's played that. I'm just wondering if it's thinnings involved. What about the marking for that? I know thinning's not very fashionable these days, but what about the marking? Where does that come in the process? The decision about that.
The marking would be to do so. The landowner would kind of be like in charge of the site and discuss that with the forest works manager. Okay, this is the sort of way that we want to thin this site. This is the type of thinning we want to do. And the forest works manager would describe how they're going to kind of achieve that. And they would discuss we're going to do selective thinning. This is the person that's going to mark it. We'll do your plots. We'll figure out the volume, whatever on the stuff there. So that would be a kind of discussion between the landowner. So the landowner sets what they want to achieve. So I want this site thinned, and I want it thinned in this kind of way, whatever sort of thinning regime you want to do. And the forest works manager will tell you how they're going to achieve that. And they'll discuss that with like their contractor and things.
Right.
Do that. So you would set the outcome as the landowner. So the landowner, I want this site to look like this at the end of the contract. How are you going to achieve that?
Right. Thanks, John. I just asked because I can imagine that community woodland associations might have different objectives and different, thoughts about thinning than a commercial operator, contractor type thing. So that needs to be has to be a kind of balanced discussion at the beginning, and not the contractor coming in and kind of bullying the community group into doing something that's more normal and traditional.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. Thank you, John. Cheers.
It's about sort of setting the outcome, and that's up to the landowner, because it's the landowner that's going to get the site back at the end. So how do you want that site to look? Well, I want it to look like this at the end of it,
Okay, thanks, John. Cheers.
Good question, Andy, and I think that's very true. And I think John mentioned the professional mentoring, which is an option if you are a member of CWA. Having those discussions without prior commitment to a contractor is really useful to know what's feasible, what's the right thing to do for your woodland, and how you should approach that contractor. On that, John, I've got a couple of questions for you. So if the community woodland group are not owners of the woodland, they maybe manage the woodland, where does the responsibility in that sort of line of command lie for them? And secondly, my second question, which might come into this, is what's the benefit of timber standing sales versus doing it yourselves and then trying to sell off the wood?
All right, okay. So where would they come? Where's the kind of roles and responsibilities? You can have more than one person. So under the law, there can be more than one person that's kind of like the landowner, sort of under the Health and Safety Act work sort of thing. So for the purposes of if they were harvesting the site, so they had agreed with whoever they've leased the woodland off, this is the work that we're going to do, they would be the landowner in the 5 roles for achieving that work. But their lease with the other landowner would set the kind of parameters of what they were allowed to do, if they were allowed to kind of harvest bits and things like that. So they would have that kind of overarching agreement with the landowner that their lease says that you can thin this bit, you can restore this bit of native woodland, whatever the lease says, sort of thing. but they would be the landowner for actually achieving that work under the 5 rules. So they would then discuss that with whoever they're getting in as their Forest Works manager, and the Forest Works manager would be talking with their contractor, sort of thing.
Perfect, thank you.
Now remind me of the other question. So the other question was asking about the pros and cons of kind of standing sales or doing it direct.
Yeah, yeah.
That's quite a big question. For the simplest thing to say is that as doing it as a standing sale takes a lot of the risk away from you as a community group. So you haven't got like a direct employee relationship with the Forest Works manager stroke contractors, in that you've basically give them a right to cut the timber, so they become the landowner doing the work. So it's a bit like what they were asking about, if I've leased a bit of ground, who's the landowner, who's the Forest Works manager, sort of thing. So the community group is set back slightly in kind of like legal terms and duty of care. What they have to establish is that the people doing the work are competent to do the work, as in your Forest Works manager and folk there that buy the stuff. But the folk actually buying the timber standing, employing the contractor, shifting the logs, chip wood, all that sort of stuff, that's their job. So it removes you from the risks of doing all that. Whereas if you're managing that as a direct contract, so it's you employing, as the community group, employing the contractor and employing the Forest Works manager and the contractor, sort of thing, that gives you a lot more kind of duties, and you're a lot closer to them duties in the sort of legal terms, is the kind of the simplest way I can answer that. I actually wrote a wee kind of note for Broadford and Strath about it. I don't know if we could maybe share that note or whatever.
Yeah, I'll source that, find it, and share it with everyone who's attending today. Thank you for that. You and your hands up, and you come.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, that's what we've ended up having to go with. The area of woodland we were looking to fell, we originally got quite significant amounts of funding to actually do the job ourselves. However, we couldn't get it done in time and lost the funding, so we didn't have an option. It was just basically we had to go with a standing timber sale, and basically that's taken away any sort of upfront risk of us spending a lot of money and trying to manage something which is difficult to manage. So yeah, we're speaking with a competent contractor who's quite happy to come in and take that on and take it away to the market and sell it. And what the arrangement was, and this was a year ago, so it might have changed now, but there was still going to be a bit of money left after they'd taken their bit. We were still going to receive a bit of income from the timber, which worked for us. But yeah, we probably obviously would maybe make more money from it doing it ourselves, but it's such it's a much bigger job and has a lot more to it. So yeah, for us it's definitely made the most sense just to go a standing timber sale.
Yeah, it's a bigger business risk doing it as a kind of direct contract, I would say, especially with the kind of timber markets and things, and how you kind of shift that timber and how easily and quickly you can move that timber. It can be a bit, it depends on kind of like locations, where you are in the country, all that sort of stuff. But if you can't shift the timber and it's sitting at roadside drying out, it gets lighter and lighter, or gets old and mouldy, especially if it's like pine and things like that. You're getting like green stain in it, stuff like that. It loses value really quick.
I suppose that's a real consideration, John, isn't it? That if we don't know these things, the difference between undertaking the work ourselves and finding the right people to do the work versus standing sale, then there's challenges there in knowing what we're dealing with and what the profit's going to be. But equally, if we do the timber standing sale, we're far more removed from what actually happens on our land. And we need to be really careful. It sounds to me like we need to be really careful in advance of exactly what we want the outcome at the end to be, so that we make sure that those people doing the work for us do it right.
Yeah, it's what I refer to as holding their feet to the fire. So it's kind of like, you agree the standards and how you're going to do the site and what the site's going to be like at the end. But it's like you have to keep kind of monitoring, do joint visits with the Forest Works manager. So you have to agree how you're going to check that the checker is checking. So the Forest Works manager is responsible for the kind of standards and making sure the contractor does the work right. So you've set the standards at the start. We want this site to be clear felled, we want the streams to have all the timber taken away from them, all this type of stuff. And it's like the landowner or the landowner's representative needs to go with the Forest Works manager when the Forest Works manager is visiting and see that the Forest Works manager is making sure that the specifications are upheld, because the landowner doesn't have a work relationship with the contractor. The work relationship is between the Forest Works manager and the contractor under that kind of standing sales stuff. So they've no clout with the contractor. They have to talk to the Forest Works manager and can't and shouldn't actually talk to the contractor. If you start talking to the contractor and telling them what to do for the Forest Works manager, you're taking on roles and responsibilities that you're not supposed to have, you're not really qualified for.
Very interesting stuff. Carbon, in you come.
Hi there, I wanted to ask a question about, oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I want to ask a question on the back of what's just been talked about regarding finding a competent contractor, because of our, as you said, end process, we're looking to fell a woodland and keep the wood. We're not looking to sell it on. We're going to use it on island, on Rassay. And my question is about how do I go about finding a competent contractor who can work within our small specifications or tight specifications for this?
The way I would do it is I would basically, you would advertise the work and the specifications, and part of your kind of like your tender process in a way of, who you're going to employ is asking them what's their kind of experience and where have they worked previously that's similar to what you're wanting to do. So you're kind of basically asking them for like a kind of CV where they can evidence, look, we've worked in this type of situation before. This is how it kind of worked out. This is what we achieved. These are the folk we worked for. And that's your kind of, that's you starting to kind of check their competency. So they should have all their kind of tickets, for running the sawmill and running the machines and, driving the dumper truck or whatever. But just because they've got their ticket doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually competent to do the work. So it's about, asking them to evidence their competency by telling you a bit of their kind of work history.
Yeah, got it. That's very helpful. So back a question just on the back of that. I work with CWA to get it out there, but like, how specifically do I advertise? Do I just Google basically all the contractors in the Northwest, or is there a list, for example, or is there contacts? Like
it's kind of a combination of all of the above, basically.
Okay.
What you're talking about there, from advertising locally to sticking stuff up on Facebook or whatever, going looking for competent contractor to come and work with us on Rassay, this is that sort of thing. There is kind of word of mouth as well. If you talk to other groups that have had contractors and things, they'll tell you how they kind of got on with ones. Within ourselves is kind of like for us as an organisation, we advertise on like the kind of Scottish government sites and things like that for people, and we write out kind of like a contract specification and people bid against that contract specification. Here's how we're going to do the work. So you could do a kind of simple version of that, where you're and you basically kind of interview people about how they're going to do the work, because it's like you're setting the scene. This is how we want the work to happen. Maybe you want to develop skills on the island and things like that as well. So you might ask them, what benefits could you bring to the island as part of your work? Could you run some chainsaw courses or machinery courses or stuff like that? So it's not just about purely delivering the work. You might be looking for kind of, how could you deliver benefits for us as part of that work?
Oh, great. That's a brilliant answer. Thank you very much.
Carmen, I know that at RASA you're having mentoring support just now, so I'm sure your mentor will be able to point you in the right direction there with regards to a variety of contractors or managers that you could offer the work to or find out a bit more about them.
Ideal, thank you.
Any more questions? Andy, and you come.
Yeah, sorry, I'm returning to the thinning scheme again. Sorry if this is common knowledge. Standing sales, are they mainly or always clear fell, or is there standing sale for thinning as well?
No, you can do standing sale thinning and stuff too. Yeah.
Right, okay. No, I'm interested because globally, internationally, thinning is a hot topic, you know, for reducing fire, you know, risks in Canada and elsewhere. And I'm interested in local communities having more, you know, active role in that kind of thinning thing, whether it's marking or whatever. So could it be the case that the community themselves could do the marking in advance of standing sale, and or is that kind of process allowed?
Yeah. It's basically like you would set the parameters of like a standing sale. If you think of a standing sale as basically a right to cut the timber.
Right.
So, however, you kind of say to them, okay, we're not clear felling. We're doing this selective thinning of this timber in this area. So here's the boundary, and you can take all the trees that are marked. So people come and have a look and see what, you know, they can see the boundary and they can see the trees you've marked. So it's that, you know, you're setting the parameters.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you very much for all these questions. If you have any more questions, please add them to the chat and I'll make sure that John gets them, then he can follow up with you regarding any queries that you've got. John, thank you very much for that.
No, thank you.
Very simple but clear information that I'm sure everyone's able to take away something really useful in that process. I had no idea about that communication chain, so I think that's going to be really helpful for our community woodland groups. So thanks very much for that.
And as I say, the FISA guidance is, you know, it's well written, lays it all out nice and clearly. You know, great kind of guides to use on it.
I'll repost that just in case anybody arrived since and hasn't actually seen the link. So I'll do that just now. So thanks very much, John. Safe onward journey. Donna, I hope he scored highly. John's wife is sitting beside him in the car. Well done. Thank you.
Okay. See ya. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Ali, I'm going to come over to you now. If you want to take control of the slides. Thanks.
No problem. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to John for his presentation, first of all. I'm hoping, judging by some of the questions, that some of what I'm going to talk about should elaborate on some of the questions that have been asked so far. So apologies if I'm repeating anything, but hopefully I'll cover some other ground that will be helpful to people. So as Sharon said, I'm the forest manager at Aegis Community Forest. I currently work part-time for them 2 days a week at the moment. To give you a little bit about my background, I've worked in the industry for about 15 years, both as a forest manager for some time and also as a forestry contractor doing a range of different activities. I achieved a degree in sustainable forest management at the Scottish School of Forestry, alongside a lot of other qualifications along the way, mostly working as a contractor. My forest management background tends to be mostly in woodland creation, or initially anyway in woodland creation and forest maintenance and that type of thing. But during sort of the 3 or 4 years when I first started as a forest manager, I did manage a number of harvesting sites as well. So it's certainly been in and out of my career to date. Outside of Aegis Community Forest at present, I'm working as a freelance kind of chainsaw operator, kind of similar to what John was mentioning. I'm felling trees that are oversized or on steep ground for a harvesting contractor that works up here in the north of Scotland. So I suppose I'll start off with one of the things that the first things to consider is your management objectives or the type of regime that your forest is managed over. At Aegis Community Forest, we currently manage the forest under a long-term forest plan. So for anyone that doesn't know, that's obviously a 10-year management plan that is lodged with Scottish Forestry. I don't think we received funding for that, but there is funding there, and essentially breaks our forest into it's 20-year felling phases, but the forest is managed over that 10 years, so it does progress past that planned period. You can also undertake a 5-year management plan, which is quite often undertaken in forests which are sub 100 hectares. If you're proposing to seek forestry grant funding, it's often good to consider either of the above, as to qualify for the things such as your sustainable management of forests and woodland improvement grant funding, you may have to have one of those in place, or it's particularly likely you will need to have that in place moving forward. Again, depending on the size of your woodland, you may simply do it under a felling permission. You might be exempt from a felling permission, or again, as some people have already noticed, you may have been served a statutory plant health notice. Unfortunately, sometimes, as you can see from the picture here, which we dealt with at Aegis, you don't really have a lot of choice. You have to come in and hoover up some windthrow that, as we've unfortunately in the last couple of storms endured, although this picture that I have here was actually before I started. I've only been in post at Aegis Community Forest for about a year and a quarter or so, and we've not actually had any harvesting undertaken since I started. So some further things to consider before doing anything really, but certainly before you start reaching out to contractors. Again, this has been covered quite heavily in John's, but one of the big questions to ask is who's going to undertake essentially everything for you, from the pre-harvesting assessments of your site and of your timber to, I guess, actually implementing the harvesting as it goes ahead. So are you going to do that via in-house assessments? Are you going to employ a forest manager, or you may wish to bring in a third-party consultant? I suppose a lot of that depends on the size of your forest, on your income levels as well. You know, Aegis Community Forest employ me as a forest manager, so it's an easy decision for them to deal with. But if you're not employing a forest manager, you perhaps have to, as I say, employ a third-party consultant to come in and advise, or you may have. We also are at an advantage in that there's a few people on our board who are quite experienced in forestry already, who have retired out of the industry, so you may have that kind of person on board as well. Another thing which seems quite obvious, but can the timber actually be extracted from your forest in terms of forest roading? Again, at Aegis, we're really lucky to have a particularly good road network there, capable of accommodating big timber wagons and low loaders bringing in the heavy machinery. But if you don't have that type of thing, roading costs can be particularly expensive at times, especially on steep ground, or if you've got soft ground to cover. It can take a lot of the profit margins out of your timber, unfortunately. Again, another perhaps obvious one, which I've covered already, ensure that you have a felling permission in place prior to undertaking any harvesting. Is planning required? That's more in relation to the building of your forest road. Do you need, obviously a lot of that is done under prior notification, but you may need planning required to either create or upgrade your connection to the public road. And excuse me, is your forest certified under FSC or PEFC? That's always worth a consideration, as it may increase your income from your timber that you're harvesting. So again, we've covered this a little bit so far, but one of the first things I certainly would be undertaking is a crop assessment and mensuration. To initially, it tells you the volume of your crop throughout your forest. You may wish to do that of your whole forest. You may wish to only do it of the areas that you're proposing to harvest. Again, part of the forest plan process is carrying out the name escapes me at the moment, but a harvesting forecast, sorry. So it's likely that you would have to do that across your entire forest before finalising your forest plan. Ours are a little bit kind of undated at the moment, so I am proposing to kind of update our entire forest at the moment by carrying out some further assessments. So you can also, by carrying out these assessments, you can assess the stand for its form and your kind of product splits. For example, what kind of log content you might have within your forest. Again, it helps you budget and predict how much income you're going to get from your timber. It also helps you assess what species you have on site. It can help predict what kind of timber markets you may be selling to for your end products. And it also gives you a chance to have some additional assessment of your site in terms of gradient, terrain, location of water courses, that kind of thing. Is there any problem areas such as peaty ground? There could be areas where if it's particularly steep and you've had a lot of rain or that kind of thing, you risk landslides and things like that, either before, during, or after you're harvesting. The one thing I've not put in here as well is actually, which I had meant to put in, is the timing of your harvesting as well. It's important, if you can, to consider particularly the weather before you decide to harvest. If you're going to have to harvest throughout the winter, it's important to consider the kind of ground that you're going to be harvesting on. So moving on then to the selection and appointment of your contractors. We talked about this in the questions following John's. So hopefully this will answer a few more questions, or at least back up what John was saying. So initially, you've got a couple of choices there. You could tender out to a management firm, such as Scottish Woodlands, Till Hill, RTS. That's not obviously limited to those. There's many out there who could do it, but that's just some of the obvious ones, or some of the biggest ones out there. The alternative is then you tender direct to a harvesting contractor or haulier, that type, or roading contractor, and that's kind of what we discussed in the question section for John's. I'll go into it a little bit further in the next few slides, but that's essentially you as the community forest are working as the forest works manager, liaising with harvesting contractors, with roading contractors, with hauliers. And we'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of that in the next slide. You also may wish to not tender at all. You may wish, which is quite often the forest management companies I've worked in the past have quite often gone with this, that they have a preferred range of contractors who they would like to use, or a range of management firms who they like to use, who already have a good reputation due to their previous work in the industry. So they may go straight to them because they know they can offer them competitive prices. They know they can offer them a good standard of work moving forward. And it's important to, whatever of the above you decide to do, to provide enough information about the site, about the crop volumes, to ensure that you're given accurate pricing, but also you're not hitting any stumbling blocks once they arrive on site to carry out the work. I mean, most of them will come and have a look at the site before they give any prices, but it just, the more they're not going to get to see every inch of that site. So the more information you can give them, the more informed they are about that site. And again, we'll talk about this moving forward in terms of the experiences we've had from Aegis, but one of the biggest things is to ensure that you have a sufficient timber sales agreement in place, or a contract in place, so that you have something to refer back to when things do unfortunately go wrong. Because it's not always anybody's fault, but sometimes things do go wrong. So it's always good to have that at the end of the day. So as I said, there's some pros and cons to tendering out to management firms or direct contractors. So we've kind of covered these with the questions from John, but I'll go through them again anyway. So with regards to a management firm, if you tender out to management firms and you select your management firm to come do the work, it kind of covers all bases, or most of the time it does anyway. They're going to take on your roading, they're going to take on any prep work, they're going to do the harvesting, haul the timber to the mills and sell to the end user. They've got good links there. They're there for a reason. In a way, it's less stressful. They have full control of that site, and as long as you've given them an accurate specification, they should be doing it. All you really need to do is come on site now and then to make sure they are doing it as per your specification. Any additional issues that weren't initially highlighted are usually dealt with and absorbed into that fixed price that they have, or they will deal with that at the time. The disadvantage, I suppose, is that, as previously mentioned, there is less control there. Once they're on site, they are in charge of that site. And unfortunately, that does usually mean there is a bit of a higher fee structure. You're paying them to manage that site for you. Whereas if you decide to go direct to a contractor, you're likely going to have to manage several operations there that a management firm would have dealt with. You're going to have to initially organise a road to be built if it's not already in place. It may need upgraded before machines can get there. You're going to have to then organise the harvesting, organise the timber haulage. You've got to ensure you have good links to sawmills already, to a range of different products depending what species you're harvesting, depending what kind of form your crop is in. There's potential there for increased stress. You know, if something that wasn't highlighted then creates a problem further down the line, you're probably going to have to absorb that into your own costs. Again, you do have more control if for example, the weather is posing an issue. You are then in charge of pulling the plug. So if you do see something going wrong, it's easier for you to then go, no, we're going to stop this until we've rectified the situation. Whereas I think if you have a management firm, I think I'll say that with a pinch of salt. I think most of the times, most management firms are quite happy to liaise with you and will stop if there's a genuine concern there. But I think, you know, direct to a contractor, you do have 100% control there. And obviously, there is potential for savings on your management fees because you are managing that site yourself. Put it with me. So that moves me on now to talking about our experiences from Aegis. Now, I will say that most of the harvesting which I'm talking about today was before I started in my position. Unfortunately, when I joined Aegis, one of the first things I had to do was organise cleanup of the site, as it hadn't been harvested to the standard that the community forest were keen to have it harvested to. So I'm not going to name any names, obviously, because it was a difficult site to manage, as you'll see here. I mean, it's particularly steep and awkward terrain. I don't know how well you can see that from the picture, but up on the left hand side here, if you can see my mouse, these slopes here are really, really quite steep. You'd struggle to walk up any of these at all. This rock faces all the way along here. We had a public road, quite a busy public road to the foot of the site, and off camera to the right hand side, there's quite a sensitive watercourse. It wasn't a SSI or an SAC, but it does flow into the Bewley and Murray Firth, which are both protected as SAC and SSI. So we were really limited in terms of equipment choice, as there's not much working room at the bottom of the hill. Our track, you can see the track here, had to be dug across the hill for machines to be able to sit on, but even then they were really struggling to have room to organise their timber at the foot of the site. As I say, the water body, which you'll see in the next couple of slides, is quite, as I say, it's not a heavily protected water body, but it does flow into a protected water body. And as far as I'm aware, adverse weather about halfway through the harvesting site meant the harvesting contractor had to pull out for a short, I think it was initially meant to be a short period of time, during which a lot of the trees on this face here blew down, which completely changed the nature of the harvesting that we were undertaking at the time, and meant different equipment had to be brought back in, and a lot of the timber that was due to be lifted from site was unfortunately left on site.
Ali, you've got 5 minutes.
Okay, no problem. And I think it took some time for the contractor to come back and finish the site as well. So again, there's another picture there. There's that particularly large water body down there with most of the drainage flowing into there. And again, limited extraction routes as well. It made it a particularly difficult site to manage. Again, not by me, unfortunately, but there was my predecessor, obviously. I think he's really struggled with it, to be honest. So post-harvesting, you can see most of the timber here was left on site. These it's difficult to show, but these stems here were hanging over a particularly steep rock face. Much of the timber has been cut from stump, so it's just completely loose, pointing downhill. There's risk of that moving and sending the logs down to the public road. And there was also a landslide down about here somewhere. I think that's what you can see there, where the landslide that happened blocked a drain which flows under the road and into that watercourse. So unfortunately, that meant a lot of back and forth with the company, with the management firm that we were dealing with, before they managed to get back to recover any of that timber on site. Again, with lack of a contract, it made it very difficult to give us any leverage to demand that they come back and make that site, to get that timber off site. And in the end, the approach we had to go with was simply make the site safe. So they came and recovered some of the timber, but it was so risky for their operators to be on site that they couldn't really, I don't think they even managed to recover a quarter of it. They just had to make some of it safe, really, to be honest with you. Again, I think significant machinery coming back on site would have made a big difference, but in absence of that contract to say that that site should have been left a different way to what it was left, the company really dug their heels in so that we weren't able to get them back on site, unfortunately. So the final approach, which we did eventually manage to agree, was just to remove what timber they could safely and implement a monitoring schedule to assess of any shift in that timber across the site. We're hoping to replant that site early in the hope that it'll stabilize the bank and stop anything from shifting, but there's not unfortunately any guarantee there. We also had installed some additional strainer posts at the bottom of the site, and we had a new deer fence installed as well. That was to go in anyway, in the hope that if anything does shift, these strainer posts might catch it. But really, it's difficult to know moving forward, to be honest with you. So that's our experiences to date. And again, obviously, any questions, but I think we're saving them till Tim has undertaken his presentation.
Ali, thank you very much. It just shows you how important a contract it is then, isn't it? That you've just demonstrated that beautifully, and I'm sure everyone will have lots of questions for you at the end.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Now, Tim or Ross, whoever of yourselves is going to be moving the slides, if you want to take control from Ali, that would be great.
So yeah, it's Ross here, I will.
Thanks, Ross.
Sorry.
Brilliant.
Is it on?
Thank you. Yes, that's you. Yeah. Thanks, Ross. I'll leave you to it. Thanks, Ali.
Okay, thanks everyone. So Tim and I are representing Cambusbarron Community Development Trust here, and our experience, contrasting experience of two recent felling contracts. One, the latter, which Tim is going to talk about, is underway, almost complete, but I suppose we do a compare and contrast and share our thoughts and hopefully get some thoughts and questions from yourselves. So just as background, Cambusbarron Community Development Trust manages Gillies Hill Community Woodland. It's quite a large woodland on the edge of the village of Cambusbarron, which is itself has become a suburb of Stirling. So it's got a large population that use the wood for recreation. I think importantly in this context, it is or has been a completely unmanaged woodland since planting back in the 1950s and 60s. So it was acquired in 2019 by the Trust. It's an unmanaged woodland with no kind of felling, replanting, any of that normal woodland practice underway, which sets the context for what follows. There's a further map of the woodland. I mean, the main interest here is the large recreational presure from the village and from the town of Stirling nearby, and quite a lot of kind of ornamental features from the days when it was managed as a Victorian estate. We move on. So we established a woodland management plan for the wood, looking at a range of outcomes focused on maintaining the recreational value of the woodland, enhancing that as far as possible, the wildlife interest, the landscape and amenity value of the area. And that was the focus of the woodland management plan. Then we got, well, the whole of our approach to the woodland had to change very quickly because we got a statutory plant health notice. So the one thing to pick out in this slide is this area in red here, which was originally in the woodland management plan, kind of intended to be lightly thinned just as part of standard woodland management. And that, because of the plant health notice, then became clear felling of all the larch in the area, which was some clear felling of some pure larch stands, but also felling of larch interspersed with other species. So just to kind of go through the statutory plant health notice process, maybe we should have been more aware and savvy about this before it came, because we had larch, and you know, this disease of larch, the Phytophthora, is not people were well aware of, but I think we hadn't thought ahead to what we would do if we did get a plant health notice. We got a notice of inspection in September 2021. Then within a couple of months, we got an issue of a formal notice of 2 sites within the inspection area being having Phytophthora, which then required us to fell all the larch within 200 meters of those 2 infection sites. Ideally, well, the target set for us was to complete that within 3 months, which is a hugely ambitious task when we were starting from a position of really just lightly managing the woodland without, well, we'll come on to, we had one area where we planned to do some felling, but that was not this, and certainly not to this extent. So about a third of our woodland area was covered by the plant health notice, and as I say, a mix of pure larch and mixed stands. We decided to manage the contract ourselves, but well, to use a standing sale contract for ourselves with, we put out to tender at short notice, a very fast, steep learning curve for us as a community about that process and how to handle it. Like many trusts, we're kind of quite lucky with the range of skills and experience we've got on board. But that's one thing. Having the focus time available to handle a process like this at short notice is another. So it put the volunteers under real strain, and the individuals who took on did a heroic job to actually get a contract let by the 10th of January. The felling was completed late, say partly due to terrible weather, but other issues with the contract. And then the actual conclusion of the timber removal was May, and it wasn't until November, I think, that year that we actually had some of the trees, the final trees, taken away to complete the contract and get the compliance with the notice confirmed by Scottish Forestry. So what did that kind of rapid learning phase feel like, and you know, what reflections can we offer? So I think there were some particular issues for us in that this process came as a complete change from what the community were expecting from our woodland management. Understandably, we hadn't included it in the woodland management plan, and it came out of the blue. So it led to a real challenge, not just with the community, but within the trust itself about how we handle this and whether we have any choices, and you know, what choices, if we do have choices in this process, what choices do we make? It also falls on the back of a lack of community understanding about the process and the urgency and the obligation to comply with it. So we had to do quite a lot of communication to bring the community up to speed with, you know, the compulsory nature of this notice. It's not whether it happens, it's how it happens. It's really the discussion to have. And the lack of consensus on the board, which got to the extent that we had to have an emergency general meeting. It put the future of the trust at doubt for a while. Fortunately, we got through that process, but just to give you an idea of the scale of kind of emotional reaction and conflict that emerged from the felling of a third of the woodland at very short notice. And then into the detail of contract management, building on the previous 2 talks, really, we had a very tight 3-month window. We went for a standing sale contract, got that let, but we had a change in felling plan because of access issues, and also to show that we were exercising choices to protect red squirrels, which we've still got in the area. It was terrible weather, and there were even more terrible than normal. And there were water management problems, so that was very noticeable. And then it came into what we could reasonably expect contractors to do, not just contractors and subcontractors. So that's the next bullet, is where there were issues. There was a challenge in communication with the individuals on site, because they weren't the representative of our contractor, it was RTS. They were people who brought in subcontractors. And that made the whole chain of communication and chain of authority really quite difficult for us. And we got to the stage where we were talking about sort of stopping the contract until the water issues were resolved. We had limited volunteer capacity. I think that's the same across all the trusts. I mean, most community woodlands are in that situation. Can't do everything. We don't have the capacity. Where it particularly hit us was just in the need for really clear, urgent communication when issues arose, and being able to disseminate that with confidence to the community and also the contractors. That's something that we got better as we went along. There was a kind of challenge for us in that there was a simultaneous SPHN process happening in neighbouring woodland. So our ownership is just part of this wood, and the boundary between our ownership and the neighbour's ownership isn't always very clear. So sometimes we were charged with bad practice or issues happening in our neighbour's woodland rather than ours. And that has made us think about how we better make it clearer what our ownership is to visitors and also residents who aren't clear. Where we did put in access restrictions necessary, they got removed and vandalised, partly due to the controversy around the felling and the impact it was having. And as I say, there was 3 months delay in getting the timber off site. Most of that, I think, to be fair, was down to really terrible weather. But some of it was down to the challenge we had in managing and communicating with both the contractors and subcontractors. So a lot to learn. I mean, it was handled successfully in the end, but I think it was much more challenging and difficult and traumatic at times for us than it could have been. And that experience then helped us in managing further contracts. So I'll pass on to Tim then to handle the work we're doing at the moment, taking the learning we have from that kind of traumatic experience. I'll stop sharing.
Right, thank you, Ross. So essentially moving on, this is all about lessons learnt really from the fairly traumatic SPHN experience for the community and for the trust itself and its woodland management group, who actively manage the woodland via its volunteers on a day-to-day basis. We don't have any internal forestry expertise staff, so that is places reliance on internal experience such as we have, and making best use of that. The first thing that following the SPHN that this is an interlude, if you like, we felt it was important to create some positive vibes for the community and the woodland itself. And so we've been very active in carrying out community-led replanting and restocking in the area that was affected by the SPHN, particularly the clear fell areas. And so far, we've either planted or in train for this year 3.4 hectares of restocking, with over 2,000 trees planted and another 1,800 to go this year. Mix mainly native broadleaves and Scots pine. And we've also carried out other positive features such as tree sculptures that you'll see on the next slide, so that the area has again become well used and appreciated by the community. So if you like, we've been able to regain some ground of trust, interest and enthusiasm for a fairly traumatised community after the previous SPHN. Now, you look at the bottom of the slide, you'll see in bold that we've just been notified of a new SPHN inspection by Plant Health in November 2025, and we're expecting that inspection to take place very shortly. And I don't know if I can show, roughly speaking, where my cursor is. So it's just immediately adjacent to where the previous SPHN boundary was, perhaps not surprising, but nevertheless, you know, a very upsetting news, and we're hoping against hope that it turns out to be a false alarm. Otherwise, you know, we're going to have to apply all the lessons learnt so far to a new potential SPHN. So if we move on,
You've gone back, Tim. There we go.
no, that's fine. No, that's okay. Is that full screen to you?
Yeah, that's working fine.
Yeah, good. So you can see there that we've had chainsaw carvings carried out. We have the community fully involved in all the planting and the subsequent maintenance of the tree planting. So it's all good, positive stuff. But back to woodland management. Also within the woodland, and as part of the woodland management plan, there is called the Dark Woods. The Dark Woods is a 3-hectare stand of unmanaged 56-year-old Sitka, never been thinned, growing tall and thin on quite good soils. Very popular with the community. It's dark woods, it has an atmosphere, but it's become susceptible to wind blow in some of the major storms we've had, and of increasing concern to the trust, becoming dangerous for access. And in the woodland management plan, following consultation, the recipe or the prescription of clear fell and restock is the proposal, the approved proposal in the woodland management plan in year 3 of the woodland management plan, that in fact is 2025. If you can see from the site very briefly, this is the area on the aerial photograph, and the site is heavily constrained by both the woodland garden, wall garden, and also the castle grounds to the south, with a quite restricted road access down a track past third-party properties to the public road. So quite a constrained site physically, which set its own challenges as to how we should proceed. There's a quick view of the woodland within and the area of wind blow that was increasing and many trees becoming unstable. We were concerned that if further wind blow took place, it would become even more dangerous and would also lose any value in terms of timber sale. So how do we proceed? We decided that in order to secure some trust from the community, which was a little bit in short supply, that we would commission a third-party independent report as to the status of the dark woods and what the management options might be, bearing in mind also, of course, it was in the woodland management plan, but time moves on and we had to regain trust. With the instruction that we wanted to focus on transparency and communication with the community following the previous SPHN experience. So we commissioned this independent consultant report from Prime Reckitt, and that also built on top of the negative tree safety survey we'd had undertaken the previous year, which had already come to the conclusion that there were major problems in the dark woods themselves in terms of tree safety for the public. And it was confirmation that clear, fell and restock was the preferred option, both in terms to manage health and safety for the community and the public, but also in terms of relevant woodland management issues for the near future and as a sustainable longer term future.
5 minutes, Tim.
Thank you. So rather than go down the management contracting route with a standing timber sale, we went to procured an independent forestry consultancy to manage the process on our behalf. Tree Story were appointed in late 2024 with these deliverables: creating an operational plan, community engagement, a specific item, securing relevant permissions and consents and licenses, marketing the timber, considering restocking options, tendering and negotiating a management felling contract, and monitoring the harvest works and quality inspections and approving invoices and so on. So managing the process on our behalf so that we could be the client and the close contact, as John talked about earlier on, but we would share the forestry manager role with Tree Story and their forester, which is we feel has worked very well. They've produced, with our help and our information, constraints plans, including, this is the ecology constraints plan. The area to the at the top of the screen, which is in green, is an area of ash dieback ash, which is also included in the felling contract, incidentally. But the main area is the yellow area, which has potential badger sets, red squirrel drays, and some archaeological features as well. So many constraints which you'd find on a sensitive woodland site. As part of the process, we've been heavily engaged in public consultation, which Tree Story have led with their particular community liaison officer, and they managed the tendering process and the finalisation of the contract detail. They also secured the potential contractor list with their knowledge of potential contractors who might be interested in the timber sale, but also have the requisite competence and experience for a site of our sensitive nature. And as part of that, at the end of that process, Ian Robb Timber Harvesting were appointed, who've done many sites close to community, particularly urban sites at Aberdeen, which was of great benefit to us. And the felling is now almost complete. The harvester moved off the site this week, and the forwarder also going next week. So the ground is more or less cleared. The ash dieback area has been hand felled, and we have on our own account a specialist ground preparation contractor lined up for the site in the early new year to carry out footpath reinstatement and carry out remaining clearing operations to make the site suitable for restocking, probably in a year's time. And throughout, we've kept the community involved through newsletters, web posts, Facebook, and so on. Just some of the community engagement that's taken place within the woodland. And harvesting underway, and it's been a very clean job despite difficult weather conditions. And I think we're pretty satisfied with the result. The appointment of both the consultant to help us and also the contractor who has carried out the works. So in summary, as Ross has already said, contractor management can be challenging by volunteer-led organisations, we only have so much experience. I've been involved in woodland management for 40 years and I know my limits. It's a question of not knowing what you don't know. So having external independent expertise has worked well for us. It comes at a cost, but I think that cost is well spent and is worthwhile in our case. Proactive engagement with the community is absolutely essential. You can never do enough, and we probably haven't done enough despite our efforts, but it's certainly worth making the effort. The woodland management plan has been essential in giving a legitimate backstop to the work we're carrying out, but obviously trying to inform and engage with the community so that they understand what we're trying to achieve, both in the long term and in the short term as well. And the last point, really, if you have larch and you're on the frontier, as we are, of Phytophthora, then do have a think about how you might prepare for an SPHN imposed on the land. Hopefully, we won't have to apply that in the near future ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you, for what is a really informative presentation there, and I'll keep my fingers crossed for you with the next inspection that comes round. That's, oh gosh, you must be absolutely devastated at having that news. We've got 7 minutes left, so over to our attendees today. Do you have any questions for Ali from Aegis and managing the contractors, or tidying up after what wasn't, where there was no contract, or for Tim and Ross about the SPHN? You, and then you come.
Hi guys, thanks very much for that, really interesting. Could Ross and Tim, could you just explain the process of getting an SPHN from Scottish Forestry? You know, the timelines you mentioned there were really quick, and you know, we've got a similar small bit of larch which I'm very worried about, but nobody else seems to be worried. I've been told otherwise, that you know, that other considerations come into it, so it's not just a case of you get given a deadline and it has to be done, otherwise it's the end of the world. But it very much seems like you guys got given a very tight deadline and you did really well to work towards that. Could you just talk a wee bit more about that process?
Yeah, well, certainly how it was for us. I think it may have evolved since, so we may well find out if we get a positive well, a confirmation of Phytophthora again. So I mean, we first of all got notified by Forestry that they were going to carry out an inspection, and that comes with a map showing the location of the suspected infected trees, and I think it's done by aerial survey. So they send someone out from their plant health team to do an on-ground inspection to, you know, confirm or rule out Phytophthora. So they contacted us, and as part of that, they asked if there's any particular barriers to going on site. I mean, there weren't, you know, it's a public site. And then we got issued with a letter confirming that, or an email, I think it was, to our trust email address, confirming that Phytophthora was on the way, and of informing us that very shortly a formal notice would come laying out all the consequences. That formal notice then arrived with, you know, on kind of official letter and map, and giving a kind of setting out the process, I suppose then, probably still the same, that felling would need to take place, a kind of sanitary felling around the infected area of all the larch, within I think it was 200 meters, I think it may be 250 now, I'm not sure. And that was expected to be done within 3 months, unless there was, I think, you know, unless there was reasonable cause otherwise. We did then, as a committee, some of the committee then met directly with the Scottish Forestry officers to talk through what we might reasonably do in response. I don't remember, I wasn't part of those conversations directly, but the feedback I got was, it was pretty black and white, that this needed to happen and quickly. And part of the reason was the restriction on felling during the bird breeding season and the like. That we ourselves wanted to get this done quickly if it needed to be done, so that we didn't then have felling activity happening in April, May, when we had committed to avoiding that time of year to protect wildlife in the woods. So that's where we were left to resolve. We kept the Scottish Forestry contact informed of progress. I think it was interesting at the end, just the degree of evidence and confidence that the Scottish Forestry team needed in order to confirm that the notice had been complied with. It did take us a year to reach that stage, because we had some timber left on site by the contractors, some dray trees that we left in order to try and protect the red squirrels, but then they were left standing and we couldn't get the subcontractor out on site to remove those when we wanted that to happen. So that took a bit longer than we expected. So yeah, it was a year end to end. But I think the real challenge was it came as a completely out of the blue to the community, a community who not exposed to that kind of woodland management approach and requirement, let alone our own sense of preparation.
Thanks for that answer, Ross. I see there's a question in the chat from Christine, so if you wouldn't mind answering in the chat, then we can ask Andy to come on very quickly. Andy, we've got 3 minutes left.
Okay, a general question in a way. When Andy Whiteman and I were campaigning, advocating for community forestry back in the 90s, we had a very adverse political landscape that we were fighting through, and I feel from listening to this, it's been fascinating that we've kind of left you all to fight this adverse regulatory landscape, in terms of getting things done. And we envisaged more communities managing forests and not managing contractors, as being your day-to-day thing. So apologies for that. We didn't obviously work enough and set that up enough. And I'm a bit despondent to hear, names like Till Hill and Woodland Trust and everything. The communities seem, to my mind, to be giving up quite a lot of power in order to get through this regulatory and other landscape. Well, one thing I'm trying to get started to assist with this is something called paraforesters. You get paralegals and paramedics and things like that. If people within a community can be trained up to be expert enough and certified in a particular branch or skill in forestry, then that, to my mind, is something that could be got around some of these regulations, and we use more in-house and in-community capacity to get things. So I'm just wondering, is there anything like that happening already in Scotland, or do you think it'd be welcome? And just have we fed you to the wolves in Andy and I campaigning and leading you into all these regulatory minefields? Thanks.
I'd like to come in there. Ross, and you come.
Yeah, I don't think it's unfair or to expect community woodlands to be managed to the same standard that all woodlands are managed at. So there is support out there in terms of grants and advice. Well, this Community Woodlands Association being really helpful. I think it would be an interesting question to ask people, groups, how much they're put off acquiring community woodlands, or if any groups have disposed of that ownership, walked away because it feels too onerous. I think that would be the evidence base. I think there is a case in point to say, how can community groups be supported to respond to something like a statutory plant health notice, a kind of urgent process? We're quite lucky in that, that question about funds, where we had reasonable funding from a wind farm grant. So, we think it costs us about 15,000 a year to manage the woodland in normal times. And we have managed to get grant funding from various sources to kind of cover that cost over the last few years. Plus, now we have the accumulated income from timber sales that we weren't anticipating, but it's sitting there to help pay for replanting and help pay for management costs like this, employing Tree Story to manage this next woodland for us. I think importantly for us, we're not there to maximise the financial income from the woodland. So, our decision to go for a contractor was that we wanted the felling that was necessary to be handled well. That was the primary thing for us. And if we covered our costs through timber sales, that would be enough. If we generate more, then that's good. But our primary, because of the really difficult experience we've had through the SPHN, our primary motive was to get this necessary felling handled well and to give the community confidence that it was being handled in the most appropriate way.
Thanks very much for that. Folks, our time has run out. I'd really like to thank our speakers today. Fascinating case studies from both our woodlands and really important health and safety information from John. So I can't thank our speakers enough for being part of today's session. Have a lovely rest of the day, folks, and thanks once again for coming. Bye-bye.